strength, if ineffectually, in Tomania's army.
Breach secured! Time clear! Ready! Fire!
Behind-the-scenes footage shot by Brother Sidney has recently been discovered.
When the dictator, I remember, he had a thing where he pulled the gun, he fired this big Bertha sort of a cannon. And I was out there, and I let out a big ha, 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 and he said, cut, cut. I thought he was going to be sore as hell. He was absolutely thrilled that somebody laughed at it.
Strafnitzhilfensekt, der Wiener Schnitzel mit der Lagerwerten und das Sauerkraut. Hey, der Filuten-Sack der Filletten.
Chaplin threw their famous resemblance right into Führer's face. His pictures were now banned in Germany, but that's not what motivated his portrayal of the dictator Hinckel. For his comic German accent, he drew on his vaudeville training. Most comedians of his era could talk Dutch.
Ein der Staff mit seiner Klatsch. Hey, der Stratz mit sich Gedenken da, mit seiner Tratsch mit Gedenken. Meine Täter wieder straffen, die straffen, sie straffen.
You know, I really started to see movies when I was 13 after the World War II. I lived in Czechoslovakia, which was occupied by the Nazis. Suddenly comes the great dictator. And there was a liberation. Because single-handedly, Chaplin reduced this monster into a pathetic, ridiculous, venomous clown.
Hey, der Flutensack der Klärten, der Strangulation mit der Hultensack der Fläten und der Blätzensack der Elten. Besieg! Besieg!
You can say that the Allies liberated Europe physically, but the great dictator Chaplin liberated us spiritually and made you think also, because suddenly you realize watching, how is it possible that this pathetic creature had such a power over good German people? Millions of people followed him, died for him, for this insane lunatic.
It's almost as if he made that film because he felt that Hitler had become his rival in reaching out for everybody.
Dein Big Buben, er verhindert dieses Crackers mit Hulten. Banana.
The Hitler character, he had a strong relationship to the early tramp. He was a troublemaker, who was primitive. And the other person, the barber, is more his human side. It's interesting, the relationship between the two and how they get confused. I think it was a very brave film to make. I don't think that many people were being openly critical of what was going on at the time, and he was maybe not the only one, but he was one of the few.
Come here, you fat-hacking storm trooper. Take it down, my lawyer. Come on. Why, you? Oh! Get around.
Oh, he bit my finger.
There.
The barber and Hinckel will eventually exchange roles. The Jewish barber pays a comic, balletic price for the accident of his birth. His creator, asked once if he was Jewish, made this superb reply: "I do not have that honor."
I love the whole film, and I think that the scene when he plays with the globe, it's just perfect metaphor for the sick dreams of every dictator.
Out Caesar, out Nolus, Emperor of the world.
That scene was written. Every single movement was written down. Whereas all the scenes where he does that pretend German, that was all improvised. And I would have thought that that would be written down to find the exact perfect words to make it sound like German. But he just apparently said to the camera, roll, and then he went on and just rambled on in this almost perfect German. I think it's an idea that he'd had for a long time. Some smart guy said, oh, that was my idea. But then there's actually footage of him way back in home movies doing it. In fact, in the home movie, he was dressed in a Grecian outfit. Just was so perfect for Hitler.
The Globe Dance. I mean, that, I could watch it for hours and hours. Rewind once again. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, I could watch it for weeks and never get bored. I mean, it's just a metaphor. I mean, it's endless, endlessly brilliant.
People just fall down dead over an alleged metaphor, but I don't find it funny or a brilliant metaphor.
Some would agree with Woody Allen, some would not. But at a time when 90% of America opposed war and half the country was to some degree anti-Semitic, this admittedly preachy film was undeniably courageous.
It was Hitler who seemed to be imitating Chaplin, not Chaplin who was imitating Hitler. Chaplin came first. Chaplin was famous long before Hitler was famous. There's a little bit of Hitler in all of us. That's the whole idea. That Hitler is not some creature who came from outer space. He's one of us. I think the genius of the film is that Chaplin realizes there's a lot of Hitler in him. That there's a lot of Hitler in anyone who dominates audiences and rouses the rabble.
There's no doubt in The Great Dictator that he felt he had to come out and say something about this phenomena, this issue of fascism and where the world was headed. And when he does blatantly speak, he's the voice of a generation. He's the voice of several generations. What is he going to say? It's an imposing of a kind of self-importance. It's very dangerous. I happen to like the tone of his voice. I liked being with him.
You must speak. I can't. You must. It's our only hope.
You have a situation in World War II, and he speaks very clearly. He makes statements on the world and the nature of government, the nature of fascism. It does sound like preaching. It does sound like, well, they expect me to make a comment on this, and I'm going to do it.
People at the time say, oh, well, he's too self-important, he's got above himself. I don't think it was quite that. He did take life terribly seriously. He thought a lot about things. He would get terribly troubled by things that were going on in the world. He was deeply distressed by the Spanish Civil War, for instance. He genuinely felt he'd got an audience, he'd got to say something.
It's not Hitler, Hinkle, it's not the Jewish barber. Suddenly, Charles Chaplin's face comes through.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world, there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone.
Not one word has lost its significance. It's as true now as it was then.
Pacifist public opinion, critical hesitation counted for little. In its initial release, The Great Dictator was Chaplin's biggest grossing film. In World War II, he vocally, controversially supported our Russian allies, notably at a Carnegie Hall rally where he followed a waffling Orson Welles.
The next speaker was Charlie. He came out, this natty figure, walked to the center of the stage, raised his hand, his arm, and said, "Comrades!" Well, the place came down.
He remained what he'd always been, a restless, driven man. But at 53, he began to find a measure of happiness when he met Una O'Neill. She was 16, the daughter of the playwright Eugene O'Neill. A New York debutante, she was now both shyly and eagerly seeking a career as an actress. For Chaplin, it was love at first sight, the last and greatest love of his life. Within a couple of months, she was living with him.
Sorry? Yeah?
This screen test for an unmade film called The Girl from Leningrad gives us a unique glimpse of her spirit in 1942.
Not yet. Don't set it up so quick. Hey, stop! Don't touch me.
But he had recently had and broken off an affair with Joan Barry, a very disturbed would-be actress who desperately broke into his home one night.
And I came home and he was very strange. He said, go to bed. So I went into bed, and what had happened is she'd broken in with the gun, and he finally talked her out of this nonsense, and she put the gun down and everything and left.
He said one day he did the greatest piece of acting he's ever done in his life. She pulled the gun on him, and she was going to shoot him. And he acted his way out of the whole situation till he got that gun out of her hand.
He could not act his way out of the law's clutches. Here he is humiliatingly fingerprinted. The FBI had been keeping a file on him since 1922. For some reason, J. Edgar Hoover held an implacable hatred for him. The FBI conspired to charge him with a Mann Act violation. The law ludicrously forbade the transportation of women across state lines for immoral purposes. Chaplin, here shaking hands with the jury, eventually won that case. Simultaneously, Joan Barry brought a paternity suit against him. And countless scandalous headlines. Barry's lawyer had a field day. Lecherous hound, cockney cad, a reptile were just some of the names he called Chaplin. Blood tests proved Chaplin could not be the father, but they were inadmissible under California law. Chaplin lost the case. Also lost was much of America's affection for its beloved tramp.
You know, he supported that child. He didn't make an issue of it. He said, okay, paid for the kid, but it was not his.
Monsieur Verdoux would deepen the nation's alienation despite this hilariously failed attempt at murder.
Now, he wants to... What are you going to do with that?
Lasso him.
Don't be silly. You can't lasso a fish. Any fool knows that.
Oh, yes, you can. All you have to do is to place it over his head like that. Then you pull it tight like this.
What's that?
A yodeler.
Oh, that ruins everything.
Certainly does.
Too bad we couldn't find a place all to ourselves.
Certainly is.
Orson Welles proposed the idea to Chaplin, based on the true case of Henri Landru, a notorious French wife murderer. Chaplin vastly expanded it into an indictment of bourgeois society.
Making Verdoux at that moment in his life, and his own morality was so much in question, it was great provocation. It was the final pin that broke the camel's back. It got him into deep trouble with all sorts of the war veterans, and everyone, I think, came down on him for making that film.
Monsieur Verdoux is a bank official who gets fired after decades of faithful service. To support his wife and child, he takes to marrying rich widows and then killing them for their money. It's a black comedy by a man who actually had no blackness in him.
I wonder how long he's going to keep that incinerator burning. It's been going like that for the last 3 days.
I know it. I haven't had a chance to put my washing on.
It's almost a mea culpa. It's a statement about capitalism. It's a statement that murder is the logical extension of business, that when you're out to make a living, anything goes.
Verdoux expertly counting his money was a chilling but well-remembered comic motif in the film.
The Lydia scene is unique, though. I think that's the first murder you see. And going up the stairs, and him talking about the moon, the elegance of the shot, and oh, yes, my dear. The way he says, yes, my dear, is like a snake. He's just coiling around her.
Yes, my dear.
And you know it's going to come down. He's going to kill somebody. That extraordinary moment, going up the steps and looking at the moon outside and reciting, "Oh, impatient moon," I forget exactly the words, but about the moon. And she said, "What are you doing out there?" "Oh, nothing."
What a night.
Yes, full moon.
How beautiful this pale Endymion hour.
What are you talking about?
Endymion, my dear. A beautiful youth possessed by the moon.
Well, forget about him and get to bed.
Yes, my dear.
And then he turns into a silhouette and goes out of frame. The music rises.
Our feet were soft in flowers.
The night changes to day, and you know it's been done.
The vulgarity of his victims is often contrasted, perhaps misogynistically so, with Verdieu's dandyish elegance.
And the next thing is followed immediately by the comic refrain of the counting of the money. But it takes you by surprise because what seems simple with this man is suddenly translated into something so eloquent and elegant at the same time. And absolutely horrendous behavior, but it's done absolutely beautiful.
A friend has told him of a poison that leaves no trace. He decides to try it on someone with whom he has no connection the police might discover. It is one of the moral turning points in a film it took Chaplin 4 years to write.
And now for the experiment.
Even the moment where he says, "Now for the experiment with the poison," I found myself, when it dissolved to the young woman in the street, I was shocked. He had the ability to shock you, slap you in the face, and then pull you back. And you went with it because you didn't want to see him kill her, and you knew that innately he wasn't going to do it. But I was shocked by him thinking that way. An experiment. And the first person you see is a beautiful face, and my goodness, he's going to kill her.
Quite a shower.
Yes, it is.
Can I escort you anywhere?
It's a beautiful, but it's also a very ugly film, I think, in a way. It's a very disturbing picture. It's almost as if he was pushing the audience, particularly after World War II, the worst war in recorded history. And if I play a character like this, how far could I push you and you still love me? Will you still accept me? And am I even relevant in a world like this right now?
The criminal is eventually caught. He will accept his fate, but not before he broadens the indictment against him to include most of humanity. Humanity was profoundly uninterested.
Have you anything to say before sentence is passed upon you?
Oui, monsieur, I have. However remiss the prosecutor has been in complimenting me, he at least admits that I have brains. Thank you, monsieur, I have. And for 35 years, I used them honestly. After that, nobody wanted them. So I was forced to go into business for myself. As for being a mass killer, does not the world encourage it? Is it not building weapons of destruction for the sole purpose of mass killing? Has it not blown unsuspecting women and little children to pieces and done it very scientifically? As a mass killer, I'm an amateur by comparison.
It was a very interesting, disturbing touch as he walks out. It's like, if you watch him walk, his stomach is a little extended, the walk is a little awkward. It's like a grotesque of the Little Tramp's walk. It really is. As he goes away, they lead him to the guillotine. It's the end of the Little Tramp, the real end. I can only imagine what it must have received when it came out. No one liked it.
You know, as a man gets on in years, he wants to live deeply. A feeling of sad dignity comes upon him, and that's fatal for a comic.
Sad dignity. It was a feeling that Chaplin knew all too well in the late 40s. He would turn 60 in 1949. His old genius for inventing gags and developing them in sustained sequences had largely deserted him. His audience was older too, and standing on its dignity. They were lost to him, as he had always feared they might be. Calvero, his character in Limelight, directly, wearily, projected his most despairing vision of himself.
What a sad business being funny.
Very sad if they won't laugh. But it's a thrill when they do, to look out there, see them all laughing. To hear that roar go up, waves of laughter coming at you. But let's talk of something more cheerful. Besides, I want to forget the public.
Never. You love them too much.
I'm not so sure. Maybe I love them, but I don't admire them.
I think you do.
As individuals, yes, there's greatness in everyone. But as a crowd, they're like a monster without a head that never knows which way it's going to turn. Can be prodded in any direction.
Chaplin's has-been character, depressed and drunken, meets the dancer Teresa when he rescues her from suicide. She's in despair because she cannot walk. Old man and young woman will conspire to inspire one another.
It still, to me, is amazing that at 20 I worked with the greatest genius in movies and had been chosen by him. It was certainly he that found me. I was a young actress. I was 19. I was in a play in London. And then I got a wire from Harry Crocker saying, would I send photographs to Chaplin? And it seemed so unbelievable to me. And I think I was so frightened by it, I did nothing. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a telegram saying, where are the photographs? Charles Chaplin. So I sent them off as quickly as I could. And of course, from that moment on, I wanted to be in limelight more than anything in the world. Every day was a miracle. I woke up every morning, could not believe that I was going to go and do this part. On the other hand, I had no film technique whatsoever. I didn't know anything. So he eased me very gradually into it by starting the scenes where I was comatose on the bed. I got very quickly used to being filmed and being in a film. I liked the intimacy of it compared with the theatre. I still do. His way of always directing from the beginning was to demonstrate, and he would demonstrate everything. My hand here, there, look up, say the line, how to say the line, was fine with me, because I worshipped him and I would have done anything that he wanted. And also, of course, when he played the young girl, he was more young and girlish and feminine and charming than I could ever have been. Sometimes he got very angry. It's his prerogative. Once, very much, but I think it was deliberate. I had this very difficult scene. I now look at it and marvel that I could do it at that age, but I'm walking, Calvera, I'm walking. And I was terrified of it, as anybody would have been. So he called me into his dressing room and he said, Claire, we just go over the words. I don't want any acting. Let's go over the words. So I kind of went over the words with him, the scene, and he said, what is that supposed to be? I said, that's what you asked me to do. No, I didn't ask you to do that. I want you to do the scene. I can't, whatever it was. Of course, I started to cry, which is what he was waiting for. So we went out on the floor. Everybody was ready. They'd obviously been clued into what was going to happen to this poor child. And we did the scene. It was wonderful.
Now's the time to show them what you're made of. Now's the time to fight. Remember what you told me standing there by that window. Remember what you said about the power of the universe moving the earth, growing the trees, and that power being within you. Well, now's the time to use that power and to fight. Calvero, look, I'm walking. I'm walking. I'm walking. I'm walking. Calvero!
He'd worked me up into that emotional pitch. He knew what he was doing when he was angry. I think he, at that point, was an older man and had many things he wanted to say in the film about love and about death and about his background in London, about the music hall, about something he knew well, a young girl falling in love with an older man.
Chaplin, Una, and their growing family sailed for London and Limelight's world premiere in September 1952.
I went before he did to set up some publicity things and everything, and he was going to come later. Then he got, from the State Department, he got the right for a re-entry permit, because he was always British. His whole life he was English. But the day he got on the boat, he and Una got on the boat, they said, we're not going to honor it. Well, of course, he got to London furious. He sent Una back to America, and he said, sell everything. Sell the house, sell the studio, sell everything. And said, we're not going back there.
We have an idea of touring beautiful England and going to all the historical spots. Naturally, we'll go to Stratford-on-Avon and elsewhere, up to Scotland and Edinburgh and all that. My This is the first time that my wife has ever been abroad, and so naturally we're going to try and cram in as much as we can.
Cram. One thing, would you comment, sir, on this proposed ban on re-entry into the United States?
I can only reiterate what I said before. I suppose I presume that that's already been published. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed.
As the late Calvin Coolidge said when he terminated his presidency, he was embarking to go home, waylaid by one of the pressmen who said, "Mr. President, won't you say a few farewell words to the American people?" He said, "Yes, goodbye."
Eventually, Charlie and Una would have 8 kids, the last 4 of them born in exile.
Probably didn't work as hard as he did in America, but I don't think he could be idle. He definitely slowed down, and he'd go traveling. He took us on trips to Africa, to the East.
The Chaplins settled in the Manoir de Bon in Switzerland in 1953. He would live out his life here, 24 more years. He was never idle. He wrote scripts, rescored older films, wrote his autobiography. And thumbing his nose at America, fellow-traveled with the communists. He even accepted a peace prize from the Soviet Union, then distributed the cash that came with it to the poor.
He created his own demise with America, I think, over time, and was quoted as saying in a very embittered way, the only thing I miss about America is almond joy bars. Almond joy and Mounds candy.
Uncle Sidney, he was great. He was our funny uncle. He was very, very eccentric, or we thought he was very eccentric. He was married to Gypsy, and they lived in a caravan because Uncle Sidney never wanted to have a house because he thought if he got in a house, he would die there, and that depressed him. He would get very depressed about a lot of things. And he was extremely nostalgic for the past. And he would watch the sunset and cry. And he would look at little babies and say, "Oh, if only I were that age." He was really terrible. And he and my father had a fantastic relationship, extraordinary relationship, the ideal relationship between brothers.
He twice interrupted his exile to make films. A King in New York in 1957, and A Countess from Hong Kong in 1966. His son Sidney worked with Sophia Loren. Chaplin's daughters also appeared in it, but like A King, it was a critical and popular failure which deeply depressed Chaplin.
He loved public, and his kids were a great public for him. And then if we went to a restaurant, he had an even bigger public. And so in Switzerland, we used to go to a restaurant, and he would always order truite au bleu. It's a trout, and it's boiled live, so it sort of looks at you. And we would be horrified, and he'd pick up the plate, and he'd take this trout, and he'd say, Emma, darling. And he'd kiss the trout on the lips, and we'd go, "Oh, Daddy, how horrible." And of course, by then, the whole restaurant would be looking. So he was an entertaining father.
His audiences now were mainly accidental. His most faithful camera was Una's. But the old man would take what he could get and do the old bits from his glory days.
It would be as though he was surprised at seeing his own work, and he would say, "But he's good." He would talk about him as him. "He's good. Oh, that's very good. Oh, but that's very good. Oh, he's funny."
I never met Chaplin, and The only time I saw him in person was in Cannes, when he was towards the end of his life. He was honored with a special award. I was there. The theater was packed to the roof. Electricity was enormous because nobody saw Chaplin in person for years. And the award is given to him by French Minister of Culture, Monsieur Duhamel, who at this time was also a very sick man who was walking with a cane. So then suddenly the light goes out, spotlight on the curtain opens, and then they are standing there. Theater explodes, bravo, standing ovation, bravos, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Chaplin was visibly so moved by his reaction that he felt that he has to reward the audience somehow. So he's looking around and suddenly he sees Monsieur Duhamel standing next to him with a cane. So he grabs his cane and does few steps, but in that moment, Monsieur Duhamel, being stripped of the cane, starts to St. Vitus dance because he couldn't. Now, Chaplin sees it, and they just clasp each other like that, embrace, just to keep standing. People in the audience who knew about Monsieur Duhamel's condition were petrified. But most of the audience didn't know, and they thought that this is a comic number to entertain them, and they started to applaud and laugh. It was so surreal. It was like Chaplin's films.
As the years wore on, more and more honors were heaped on him. The world was bent on reconciliation. Even the United States wanted to forgive and forget and remember. That process was completed when he received an honorary Academy Award in 1972.
He did come for the Academy Award, but that was only for financial reasons, because he just re-released his pictures, and he came back and said, "Oh, that's very kind of everybody." And they were there 2 days, the Beverly Hills Hotel. He said, "When are we going home?"
I can only say that thank you for the honor of inviting me here, and oh, you're wonderful, sweet people. Thank you.
Chaplin had 5 more years to live in declining physical and mental health. But one has to believe death held few terrors for him, because he'd long since imagined his triumph over it, his artistic immortality, as well as the hard, simple fact of his passing. Both occurred in the same limelight sequence, which he shared with his great rival, Buster Keaton.
I think he must have known that he was the greatest, but I think he had a problem wondering if everyone else still thought so. I remember once, he was then very old, and I came with a boyfriend of mine, very interested in cinema, not so interested in Chaplin. He preferred Buster Keaton, which was not the thing to do. We arrived and he spoke with my father a little bit about the silent films, and then he went on to talk about Buster Keaton, and my father he got smaller and smaller, and he shrunk, and he was so hurt. It was like someone had stabbed him. And he just became very, very quiet. He didn't say a word during dinner. And after dinner, he was thinking and he was looking into the fire. And suddenly he peeped in a little voice. He looked at my friend in the eyes and he said, "But I was an artist." And no one knew what he was talking about. And then he said, and I gave him work.
So moving with Buster Keaton and him together. He's in the foreground. Chaplin's in the foreground. Your eyes on him, but he has Keaton perfectly placed. He doesn't diminish him at all, and it goes on. And the two of them are going. It's like jazz musicians taking off.
It was beautiful. It was two men who had the greatest respect for one another. I personally was moved because I knew that Buster had seen some hard times, and here was Charlie, a multimillionaire, still with his own studio and all that, and there was Buster, had all that and lost it.
David Thompson once called Chaplin the looming, mad politician of the century, the demon tramp. A harsh judgment. Yet there was something demonic in him, quite visibly so in this sequence. He was still driven by his relentless ego, by his helpless need to dominate his audience, now indifferent, even hostile.
If you're not curious anymore, you don't know where to grow, you're not anxious to know how to grow as a filmmaker, a writer, artist, or whatever, that's death. He, I think, felt that, and I think you have the results in Limelight.
There's something brave, sublime, and without precedent in movie history about a man contemplating his own death on screen.
He makes peace with it, too. He accepts the passage, doesn't like it, but he accepts the transition of being old and dying, but also of him no longer having the energy of the youth. When that sheet is put over his face with that beautiful music at the end, that is the final image of Chaplin is there.
I was fortunate enough to be in that scene, silent, and Buster was there. And we're pulling back, and Buster is muttering to Charlie, not moving his lips. Good, Charlie. Stay just where you are. You're right in the center. Hold it. Don't move. Yeah. That's it. We made it. Yeah. And I thought, boy, you, Norman, have been present at a moment in history. And it was just, it made you embrace your whole profession, so to speak. You say, this is what the real greatness in this profession is.
The last years of his life, he very much withdrew into himself. It was very hard for my mother. She had a very hard time really looking after a man who'd been so vital and such a strong presence suddenly really vanishing away. But he seemed to be very much at peace with himself. He kind of slowly drifted away, and his death was just at the end of a very slow drifting away.
His was the face of his century. His was the life of his century. Through his will and energy, and yes, genius, he encompassed, as much as one man can, the joy and the anguish of his times, their romance, their horrors, and of course, what laughter we could find in them. He was a flawed man, a haunted man, a tormented man. Which is to say, he was only human. But with this uncanny ability to reflect and refract our humanity back at us.